lekulam. Shalom. Now we're going to speak in which language? In Hebrew, in Amharic, in Tigrit, in Yiddish, in what's going
English.
on?
Our today discussion will be in English. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Amithal. Okay. Shalom, shalom lekulam. You know, I'm very happy. I'm very happy for the opportunity, and thank you very much, Ato Reta Alemu Nega. Shalom, shalom. Ato Reta Alemu Nega הוא שגריר אתיופיה בישראל ושליח מיוחד של ממשלת אתיופיה, ambassador and special envoy in Israel. This is a great privilege for us. And you know, and you also, it's very privileged, you are ambassador in Holy Land, in Jerusalem, but it is actually written in Kivre Nigist that the Holy Land, or maybe the Holy of Jerusalem, has moved from Jerusalem to Ethiopia in Aksum. So we don't know who is the holy city, who is the holy Aksum, Ethiopia and Jerusalem. Anyway, we are privileged that we are belong both to Ethiopia and also to Jerusalem. You know, as Professor Ephraim Isaac, he told me on behalf of Ethiopian's prime minister, when the people of Europe live in caves, Ba'me'arot, during this time, Ethiopia was an empire in the world. So Ethiopia is empire, beautiful country in the world. Therefore, Ambassador Reta Alemu Nega, your efforts to strengthen the relationship between Israel and Ethiopia in various fields, in various ways, and to recognize Ethiopian culture among Israeli citizens is, as you know, this worthy of appreciation. So thank you very much, Mr. Reta Alemu Nega. You know, again, as I remember as a small child, as a Jew, as a Beta Israel, I remember living in a small village in Ethiopia, together with respect and love for one another's trust and belief. You know, it doesn't matter if you're Christians, Muslim, or Jewish. We just respect each other and give honor. And this is, I think, it's very, very important for this approach, for not only for Ethiopia, it's very, very good for all human beings and all the citizens in the world. So therefore, I think that Ethiopia must serve as a model for all peoples, to serve as a bridge and to bring nation closer together. Okay, so Ethiopia, as Professor Haggai Ehrlich used to say, was never ruled by colonialism. And Ethiopia has always been a proud and strong independent country. And he wrote many books, Haggai Ehrlich, about it. And I'm therefore happy, and it's our privilege, Professor Haggai Ehrlich, you know, his most his knowledge is amazing. Is my teacher, my friend, and we are this our privilege to invite you to give us a speech. And Professor Haggai Ehrlich, Tel Aviv University, Department of African History and Middle East and African History, and his topic for today's lecture will be Jerusalem and Ethiopia monarchy from the Queen of Sheba to Emperor Haile Selassie. So thank you very much, Professor Haggai Ehrlich, and between 10 minutes and 15 minutes. Please.
You hear me? Thank you.
First, I want to make my opening remarks. Basically, thank you very much. But in the interest of time, I want to make my opening remarks. Distinguished scholars and excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all the participants, on behalf of the Ethiopian Embassy to the State of Israel, I would like to welcome you and express my appreciation to all of you for joining us today to be part of this webinar, virtual meeting under the theme Ethiopia in Jerusalem. Please also allow me to thank the scholars who will soon present their work, as well as for their collaboration to be able to join us today to organize this symposium. As you all know, Ethiopia and Israel have a unique historical and spiritual relationship. The relationship of the two countries, which dates back to the biblical times, has left a living symbol. The legacies of the historical and spiritual relationship are symbolized, one in the Beit Israel community, and two in the ancient Ethiopian historical and spiritual sites that continue to serve as a permanent bond for the friendship between the two countries. And I would say, I would like to emphasize that the context in which we are organizing this symposium. We have a strong bilateral relationship, and the scholastic discussions on the historical, cultural, and people-to-people relations between the two countries that would enable us to consolidate the gains we made on public diplomacy and build much stronger partnership in the future. The first question that comes to the minds of all who come to attend this symposium is that what's the connection between Ethiopia and Jerusalem? Second, how Ethiopia is present in Jerusalem? There are several historical events that tie Ethiopia and Jerusalem, which are recorded in historical bibliographies. And in the Bible or Torah, or in the Quran, their connection have been highlighted numerous times. Ethiopia is one of the oldest African states with 1,000 years of history, which has been mentioned in the Old Testament and many other books. Many prophets have mentioned Ethiopia with appreciation, including the kingdom of Aksum, and otherwise referred to it as Abyssinia. All these narratives give high significance to the theme of the symposium that we are having today. Ethiopia continues to have its own mark in Jerusalem in different ways. Ethiopia is a home of ancient human civilization. Ethiopia is unique in many ways. Ethiopia has its own calendar, its own alphabet, its own distinct culture. It is a proud nation embracing and celebrating a unity in diversity, which has people with diverse language. We have 83 different languages being spoken in Ethiopia. It's a mosaic of culture. And when we come to Jerusalem, Jerusalem is a special city. It is a center of the three Abrahamic religions. It remains center to the faiths of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as a holy place for the faithful. As referred by one scholar, it is sacred to all peoples of the book. The scholars who are with us today will elaborate on the theme of the webinar. But what we have to say at the beginning is Ethiopia's history in Jerusalem goes beyond 3,000 years. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church and in all its affiliations and its work has more than 2,000 years history, and with people claiming that there has been even Ethiopian delegacy in the Holy Land ever since the time of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. The historical visit of the Queen of Sheba to Jerusalem remains a monumental tie between both Ethiopia and Israel. The Queen of Sheba came to Jerusalem to visit King Solomon and to test his wisdom. According to the Ethiopian Book of Kings, or what we call the Kibra Negast, the Queen of Sheba gave birth to Menelik, who ruled Ethiopia, succeeding his mother. The famous visit is evidence for the existence and importance of the relation between Jerusalem and the ancient kingdom of Ethiopia. The Queen of Sheba's visit indeed is a living testimony to our centuries-old friendship. During the kingdom of Aksum, many places were replicates of the places in Jerusalem. The kings built synagogues, churches in Ethiopia and Jerusalem. They sent gifts to the churches in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is known for welcoming many of our leaders. The kings who ruled from Aksum, from Lalibela, from Gondar, paid homage to the monasteries. Ethiopian Jews, Christians, and Muslims continued to travel for pilgrimage to Jerusalem. There are stories about Emperor Lalibela in the 12th century, who lived in Jerusalem for many years, and then went to Ethiopia with a vision of building another replica of Jerusalem. He executed his vision by carving about 12 rock-hewn churches, and this in his town named after the king, the town of Lalibela. These churches are still known as the wonders of the world. Currently, there are historical buildings named after many of the royal families in Ethiopia. Among others, the times of Emperor Tewodros, Emperor Johannes, Emperor Menelik, who continued to create connections with the rulers of Jerusalem by then. And there are historical buildings named after Empress Taitu, Empress Soditu, in the middle of Jerusalem. And they have left their legacy. Even Emperor Haile Selassie spent some time in Jerusalem, where he also maintained a royal residence in the center. Also, in the 19th century, number of Ethiopian buildings were constructed in Jerusalem, including the consulate and the Ethiopian church in the new part of the city. That's why we have a neighborhood named Ethiopian neighborhood and a street named Ethiopian street in Jerusalem. Moreover, Debre Sultan, or known as Der Sultan, is the home of Ethiopian Orthodox Church in the old city of Jerusalem, where Ethiopian monks reside for centuries. Through the strong belief in the historical legacy in Jerusalem, both Ethiopia, Jews, and Orthodox Christians continue to observe parallel spiritual and cultural lifestyles. Jerusalem has a huge value in the eyes of the Ethiopians. Even though Jerusalem was under different rulers, Ethiopians have continued their love for Jerusalem, which is ever continuing. Many show their love by visiting the Holy Land annually. Many of the Ethiopians used to travel by foot for months to reach Jerusalem. A lot of Ethiopians still live in Jerusalem, which commemorates the long-standing relationship between Ethiopia and Israel. Today, we focus on the historical and spiritual sites that we have in Jerusalem, and little is known about these places, their physical situation, and the conditions is not well maintained. Therefore, one of the objectives of this webinar is to highlight the historical, spiritual, and cultural ties of Ethiopia and Jerusalem. And the platform is to create awareness about the lasting ties between Ethiopia and Jerusalem and in physical and spiritual domains. This will also enhance the friendship of the people to people that we cherish for more than 3,000 years. I would like to stress that this webinar is about exploring the rich and common history to strengthen people to people friendship and enhance our understanding. This is part of our public diplomacy, and the relationship between Ethiopia and Jerusalem is long-lasting and will continue for generations to come. This academic discussion, the main theme will be about the long-lasting relationship, friendship, and partnership of the two nations. Thank you very much. And now I will leave the floor to the moderator. Thank you for taking time to listen to my speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and our special envoy in Israel, in Holy Land, and also Ethiopia is Holy Land. Thank you, Atoreta Alomu Nega. Thank you very much. And now I give permission, the voice to Professor Haggai Ehrlich. And Haggai Ehrlich, as I mentioned before, he spoke. His topic for today lecture will be in Jerusalem and Ethiopia, monarchy from the Queen of Sheba to Empire Haile Selassie. So Haggai Ehrlich, please, bevakasha.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Sharon. It's a great privilege, and I'll try to use my time very efficiently. As it was mentioned, Jerusalem is meaningful, perhaps to all people and civilizations around the globe, but perhaps for Ethiopia is even more so. Jerusalem is important religiously to Christians all over the world, to Jews, of course, all over the world, to Muslims. But in the Ethiopian case, the church and the state remained connected. The crown and the cross from the 4th century until 1974, until the demise of Haile Selassie. There was no separation of church and state, and both Ethiopian Christianity, in this case we talk only about Christianity, but Ethiopian Christianity is a state religion in Ethiopia, and the nationalism, the traditional and the modern, the self-identity of Ethiopians, both were connected to Jerusalem. And of course, the beginning is the initial story of the Queen of Sheba and Solomon. No point in repeating the story itself. The Kebra Nagast enshrined him in the 14th century, and every Ethiopian, of course, is aware of the story itself. The meaning of that, historically, was first that the Ethiopian kings were descendants of Solomon. Amdatzir and Zara Yaqub, Haile Selassie was the 25th emperor of Ethiopia, descendant by constitution, belief, myth, to Queen of Sheba and Solomon. Second, that the nobility of Ethiopia under the royal system were also Israelites. As the story went, each of the 12 Hebrew tribes sent the best 1,000 people of his to accompany Menelik back to Ethiopia, and therefore their descendants are the true Israelites, the nobility of Ethiopia. So that Ethiopia itself, that Jerusalem, was renewed in Ethiopia itself, without abandoning the old Jerusalem here in the Holy Land, in Ethiopia itself. The Ark of Covenant stored in Aksum. Every church is having the Tabot and the places and all that. Ethiopia is also Jerusalem. And Ethiopian Christianity is replete with Hebraic biblical customs, which is unique in Christianity all over, and it's all related to the connection to Jerusalem. there were historically two anchors in the East, in the Middle East, for Ethiopia to affiliate itself with the general outside world. Since Ethiopia, as a Christian state, was, so to speak, isolated by Islam, the anchors to the East were very important for Ethiopians. One was Alexandria or Cairo, the connection of Ethiopian church being a bishopric of the Egyptian one. And all the abunas, the head of the states from 333 to 1951 were Egyptian monks sent to Ethiopia. So the connection was very, very important there. But it connected Ethiopia to Egypt, not to the greater world. The connection to the greater world was the second anchor in the middle of the Middle East, which was Jerusalem, or rather the first anchor was in Jerusalem. Here, through the connection of the Ethiopians with Jerusalem, in Jerusalem, they were also always connected to the greater Christian world, which had his presence, of course, in the holy city of Jerusalem. Just one episode, Emperor Tsar Yaqub in 1441 sent a delegation to Florence through the connection made here in Jerusalem between the local monks and the Catholics of the time. So that was a window to the world, very, very much important, much more important in that respect than the Egyptian connection. And of course, the Ethiopian presence here in Jerusalem, the monastery of Dera Sultan, mentioned already, as early as the 4th or the 5th century until today, it was an evidence to Ethiopian presence in the holy city. As you know, I'm coming to one episode which is very important to connect to our days. In 1838, there was a plague in Jerusalem. All the Ethiopian monks perished, and the Egyptians, Coptic Church, took control of Dera Sultan. And when the Ethiopian returned, they lost the key to the very monastery. And all the Ethiopian efforts to regain the key, which was much more than just the key, it was the key to affiliation to Jerusalem, to the very identity of Ethiopia. The Egyptians would not return it. Then the Ottomans, who regained control of Jerusalem, would not return it to the Ethiopians. Then came the British and the Jordanians. No one returned the key. Only after Israel captured or liberated or whatever East Jerusalem in 1970, in April, the Israelis changed the lock and returned the key to the Ethiopian monks. Later on, of course, it became a legal matter, much of a dispute. The Israeli High Court ruled that the key should be returned to the Egyptians, but it's up to the Israeli government to decide if and when. So this is the situation today, that Ethiopia is having its presence in Jerusalem. As the ambassador said before, all modern rulers of Ethiopia tried to strengthen the presence in Jerusalem, not only Dera Sultan. Emperor Theodorus had his vision of liberating the Christian world all over, including Jerusalem. Nothing came out practically of that. Emperor Johannes sent a monk and money, Walda Samahat, to Jerusalem to start purchasing property outside the walls and build what is today the beginning. It was the beginning of Deborah Gennet and the Ethiopian church, and later on the consulate in Ethiopia Street, I believe that there are over 20 buildings today built and owned by the Ethiopians. Rastafari, the future Emperor Haile Selassie, came to Jerusalem in 1924. He went also to Cairo to regain the keys, to no avail. But here in Jerusalem, he took care of the monks. Then, of course, later on, the most important episode of 1936, Haile Selassie fleeing from the fascists, the occupation, the brutal occupation of Mussolini. And first he came to Jerusalem. For him, it was like the natural thing to do, to come to the roots of Ethiopian identity here in the time of his flight. I must say that for the Jewish community here, the arrival of Emperor Haile Selassie in 1936, at the time when Hitler was already in full power and his anti-Semitism in Europe, and the emperor coming as an example of what brutal Europe can do to a weak nation, here it was quite an impressive event, the coming of Haile Selassie. He himself stayed only 2 weeks, but he left his family, his wife, Tegemenen, and others here, and they stayed here in Jerusalem. And ever since then, the modern connection was there, not without problems. Haile Selassie himself never returned to Jerusalem, even though he visited the whole world around. But he sent a consul. One of the consuls was I forgot the name of the historian, Tekla Sadek Makuria. And of course, relations between Ethiopia and Israel were very important, all revolving around the mutual historical awareness, beginning with Queen of Sheba and so on. I have no time to go into that, just to mention perhaps that Israelis built also in Addis Ababa. My old friend, the architect Zalman Einav, he built the theater, the National Bank, the Phil Woha, the University Library. And one day the emperor invited him and said, "You please build or plan a mausoleum for me and my wife, for Tegemenen, and let it be in the shape of the Shield of Solomon." Of course, as we know, he was not fortunate enough to be buried that respectfully in a mausoleum in that shape, and his end have to be told elsewhere. But the connection was very meaningful during the royal time, all throughout. As I said, it went into the very identity of Ethiopia, the connection to Jerusalem. I want to finish by one episode in order to pave the way for the next speaker. I visited Ethiopia like 20 times after Haile Selassie until today, and I have vividly in my memory a meeting with the foreign minister, or the Communist Party foreign minister of Mengistu, Dr. Ashagre. It was in 1986, and he told me, "You tell everyone in Israel, we may be communists, but first we are Ethiopians. And for us, Jerusalem is as sacred wherever and whenever we are." I'm glad to say that today's situation and relations between Ethiopia and Israel are dependent on old memories, but are very normal, very fruitful, of mutual beneficial to all, and Ethiopians are free to worship and walk in Jerusalem, in their place under the sun of the holy city. I'm also glad to say that not only Jerusalem is part of Ethiopia, but today, thanks to the arrival and absorption of the Beta Israel here, Ethiopia is a part of Israel also, which assure that future relations between the two countries, the two civilizations, always revolving around the notion of Jerusalem, will continue. Thank you.
Professor Hagai, thank you very much. And you know, you wrote a lot of books of this topic, and I suggest to all of you to read his book. It's amazing, very, very important. So thank you very much, Hagai. You know, I used to say, in Ethiopia, we pray like this, with a hand like this, in Ethiopia, okay? With the movement is with hand. In Israel, the Jewish people, they pray like this. You know, when I came to here to Israel, I was in shock. Why people pray like this? Because in Ethiopia, if someone pray like this, we send to him immediately to the hospital. The question is, you know, what's mean to pray like this? So when we pray to God, it means our purpose is to deliver something to the God, or opposite is right, to take something from the heaven, from the God. Therefore, the question is, when we pray, the movement is from inside to outside or from outside to inside. Deliver and receive. So I think this question, as we heard Professor Hagai earlier, question is the relationship between Ethiopia and Jerusalem is like the relationship between people in the God. So I don't know where is the God, Ethiopia or Jerusalem, who is the wife, who is the husband, but at the bottom line, all the time have Ethiopia receive and from Jerusalem, and Jerusalem also receive something, deliver, and all the time have a relationship between Ethiopia. And so thank you very much, Hagai Ehrlich. And
Sharon,
I'm sure that if
Sharon, you are a rabbi, you know the Bible better than me. There is a saying in Isaiah, I don't remember, that Ethiopia will extend its hand to God. You remember this?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I remember that. And Moses, his second wife, she was from Ethiopia, as you know. Moses, his second wife, she was from Ethiopia.
But extending
anyway,
the hands to God, this is Ethiopian, but by biblical virtue.
Yeah, thank you, Hagai. And next, so maybe the Messiah will be from Ethiopia. Anyway, the next, we have a privilege. The next lecture will be by doctor, maybe as soon as a professor, but doctor and my friend and my teacher, and this Tefera, maybe Professor Dr. Anders can explain to us if we say Tefera or Teferi. Anyway, Professor Dr. Anders Teferi, Tel Aviv University, he's, a smart person with a lot of knowledge and a lot of modesty. Tzanua מאוד tzanua, like, Ethiopian culture. And anyway, when I need something, translate, understanding of word language in Amharic, in Ge'ez, I have always address. I call him and he immediately explained to me what's mean. So this is an opportunity, first of all, to thank you, Dr. Anbese. And Dr. Anbese is Department of Hebrew and Department of Hebrew Language and Semitic linguist, and he specializes in Hebrew, Amharic translation, and lexicography. Please, Dr. Ambassi, Dr. Anbese, if you can explain to us what does it mean, lexicography. The topic today's lecture will be exploring Ethio-Israel relation from 1974 to the correct date. Please, Dr. Anbese Teferi. Doctor, you need to open your mute, please.
Microphone. Okay, okay.
Oh,
so
you're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah. So I want to be excused beforehand. You know, my laptop didn't function, so I'm talking from my cellular phone, so it may have some deficiency regarding color or something like that. But you must pay attention to my voice and not the color of the screen. Okay, thank you very much. So because of the shortage of time, I want to begin with a brief introduction. Ethio-Israel relations are historical and they have endured despite governmental changes. And contrary to various speculations, the relations between Ethiopia and Israel did not emanate either because of the travel of Queen of Sheba to visit King Solomon, as espoused in the Kebra, or nor because of the presence of Ethiopian Jews. But I'm not, how do you say, belittling the importance of these 2 points. You know, these have also important place in the relation. But first of all, the source for forming the relationship was, first of all, was geopolitics of that era. As you know, both Ethiopia and Israel are non-Arab countries. And during the 1960s, and even nowadays, Israel defines itself as a Jewish homeland, and Ethiopia of that era defined itself as a Christian state. So both were not, how do you say, although there in Ethiopia was a sizable population of Muslims, but they didn't have part in the central on the politics, okay? So these 2 points united both countries. There are also other things which are also important. In the 1960s, Ethiopia was threatened by the ELF, Eritrean Liberation Front, so it went to get some kind of military assistance from Israel. And Israel, on the other hand, Ethiopia was its only ally in the southern direction. As you know, I don't have to explain to you, Israel is surrounded by how to say, hostile neighbors, yeah. Also, it changed after 1979, still, and now it is in a very hostile neighborhood. So Ethiopia was its ally in the southern direction. And Ethiopia was, during that time, Eritrea was part of Ethiopia, and Israel also wants to have an access to Bab el-Mandeb, which is a strategic water point. Nowadays, it is even more strategic because almost all the superpowers have their bases there. Even China is building a base, Turkey, etc. So, but during that time, Israel wanted an access to Bab el-Mandeb because that is a strategic waterway, not to go for Israeli navigation to continue to Asia, to Africa, etc. Okay, so they want to have an access to this strategic waterway. So that's one of the cause of the relationship. And also, Israel also saw the Eritrean issue and as extension of the Arab-Israeli conflict. It was led to be convinced, yeah. But as you know, later on, although Eritrea became independent, it didn't become part of, the Arab League, etc. But during that time, Israel believed that it will become part of the Arab League, and then it may not have access to this Bab el-Mandeb. So they have a strong diplomatic relationship from 1956 up to 1973. At this point, I want to stress that although Ethiopia and Israel has a very strong relationship, Ethiopia was fearful of an open alliance with Israel. Why? Because it was afraid of what will happen, if the Arabs are united. So one of the things they required from Israelis was not to wear uniforms. Yeah. For example, they didn't do that to U.S. officers during that time. And the other thing, Ethiopia also have only a consulate in Jerusalem, while Israel immediately opened an embassy in 1961.
Nuru, hi, how are you?
Okay, so that is and also the many aspects of Israeli military aid were kept secret, and the relationship remained low key. Yeah, so Ethiopia continued to play a very careful balancing act. That is an introduction. Now I want to tell you briefly why there was a breaking of relations with Israel in 1973 and then the 1974. There was a pressure by, in 1973, there was what's known as a Yom Kippur War between Israel and Arab countries. So there was pressure by Arab nations in OAU, especially by Algeria, Libya, Sudan, and Egypt. And Arab nationalists also campaigned to move OAU from OAU's Organization of African Unity from Addis Ababa, probably to Cairo. Yeah, by the way, Gaddafi tried also to do the same in 2000 to move to Tripoli. You can imagine what would have happened now if OAU was in Tripoli nowadays. And also a threat of crippling oil embargo by Arab countries. And also around 12 African countries already severed relation with Israel. So Ethiopia was obliged to sever relationship, and the cabinet voted to break the relation. But Haile Selassie vetoed the decision, by the way, Sarah Ainor, the last Ethiopian ambassador is named Hanan Ainor. I know his wife, Sarah Ainor, and we have some conversation. She passed some years away. She told me that it was very difficult for the emperor, to sign that paper, He didn't want. By the way, the foreign minister during that time, Menasse Haile, says, I want to quote from the book of Ehrlich, Professor Haga Ehrlich, Ethiopia and the Middle East, page 173. So Menasse Haile says, it's not a popular move, and we have no doubt that it will help us in the short run only. We hope that moderate Arabs of that time, Egypt, Morocco, and Jordan, will not let the radical ones such as Syria, Libya, and Somalia to attack us. So it was a very difficult decision for Ethiopia to break the relationship. Okay, after 1974, after the revolution, by the way, I want to say something briefly. By the way, the emperor was toppled almost 4 months after the Israeli advisors left Ethiopia. And some people say, if there was no diplomatic breaking of relation, severing the relation, probably if Israeli advisors were in Ethiopia, there was no probably revolution. But I don't know, there are other dynamics which play a part. But I have one evidence for this. For example, in 1960, when Haile Selassie was in a state visit in Brazil, it was there was a coup d'etat in 1960 by General Mengistu Nawai, Garmame Nawai, and his associates. So it was an Israeli advisor who alerted the king and who helped him to communicate, General Abiy. And so Haile Selassie returned to Ethiopia, and so the rebellion was crushed. They said this is because of the assistance of the Israeli advisors. By the way, in 1973, all Israeli advisors already were reminding the king about the rebellion happening in the army, but the king probably was senile and he didn't listen. Anyway, after the Derg come to power, also during the daytime, they espoused socialism and Palestinian cause and denounced Israel as a Zionist and expansionist state. But behind the, how to say, behind the curtain, or how to say, secretly, Ethiopia has a kind of a connection to Israel. Why? Because they needed arms supply because of the insurgency in Eritrea and then Somalia. And also because, you know, there was also arms embargo from USA after the Ethiopian revolution. So they want to get some arms. And also Mengistu was claiming that the Arab countries, especially Egypt and Sudan and Saudi Arabia, etc., were trying to change the Red Sea into an Arab lake, and they want to destroy the socialist regime. So, by the way, Israel also held a similar view, not regarding the socialist regime, but they were afraid that Red Sea will become an Arab lake. So they decided to give a clandestine assistance. So they sent advisors. They also trained the 5th Division, known as the Nebel Division. In 1977, they sent about 2,000 Israelis to teach anti-insurgency techniques. Even during the Ethio-Somali War, they supplied spare parts for U.S. tanks and F-5 jet fighters, because, as I said, because of U.S. embargo, you know, Ethiopia couldn't get these arms. Yeah, but in Ethiopian history, what is always mentioned is about the assistance of the Russia, Cubans, Yemeni soldiers, etc. But Israel is never mentioned. Why? It's the same story. As Emperor Haile Selassie was careful not to reveal his relationship with Israel, Mengistu also, Colonel Mengistu was also very, how do you say, careful not to reveal these relationships. And I want to also continue a bit. By the way, up to the, let's say, around 1977, the issue of Ethiopian Jews was not brought up. I don't want to say Israel didn't ask. Israel asked really, you know, to even Haile Selassie, approached Haile Selassie to, you know, how to allow immigration of Ethiopian Jews, but the king refused. So for Israel, the strategic relation was important than Ethiopian Jews. So Ethiopian Jews, their issue was not raised. Israel especially started to raise the issue after 1977. By the way, in 1973, Rav Ovadia Yosef, the Sephardi chief rabbi of Israel, ruled that Beit Israel are Jews like others, and they should go to Israel. And the same decision was taken by Rabbi Shlomo Goren, the Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel. And in 1977, the law of return was passed. Okay, so the law of return is known as Chok HaShvut in Hebrew. It allows every Jew and also his couple, you know, children to immigrate to Israel. Okay, so up to that period, up to 1977, the Beit Israel were the big elephant in the room. Okay, their presence was known, but their topic was not raised. Okay, so when Israel started to supply arms in 1977, they also have a secret deal. You know, they wanted the planes bringing the arms also to return, when on the return journey, to bring some of the Ethiopian Jews. And at least two plane loads of Ethiopian Jews arrived. But in 1978, General Moshe Dayan, the famous war general who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, announced publicly that Israel is helping Ethiopia in its Ethio-Somali war. That enraged Colonel Mengistu, and he expelled all Israeli advisors. Others say Colonel Mengistu during that time he already got a lot of arms from Moscow, so he didn't need, the assistance of Israel. So they cite this as a reason. But after 1979, Ethiopia's strategic advantage diminished because of three reasons. Israel's peace treaty with Egypt in 1979, abandoning of the periphery strategy. Periphery strategy was, it began by Ben-Gurion. What is a periphery strategy? It is uniting Iran, Turkey, and Ethiopia. These are countries found at the periphery of the Middle East, non-Arab countries. So they, Ben Gurion want to make an alliance of these three countries, you know, as a kind of a buffer, you know, a kind of to get some kind of assistance. Israel is always an isolated country, so it wanted some kind of assistance. But this didn't, how to say, materialize. As you know, in 1979, there was this Iranian revolution, and 1974, the Ethiopian revolution, etc. Okay, and also the double expulsion of Israelis in 1973 and 1978 diminished the importance of Israel, but still Ethiopia is important. But what I want to say is, even during this their period, after Israelis were expelled, Israel still was assisting the government of Mengistu. For example, in 1985, they sold spare parts of, let's say, around 20 million US dollar, which was captured during the first Lebanon War of 1982. And it's now believed, for example, there was an operation known as Operation Moses, in which 10,000 Beit Israel were evacuated to Israel, first after walking a very long journey to Sudan, the camps, and then the Mossad opened, how do you say, fake hotels, you know, along Port Sudan, and then they were evacuated by small dingy boats and or even Hercules planes landing in the middle of Sudan at the dark of a night. Yeah, so it is believed that Israel provided military assistance, but this was kept secret. And the other thing is, I want to mention also the renewal of a relationship in 1989. As you know, there was 1987 was beginning of perestroika, and Gorbachev wanted to distance himself from Colonel Mengistu, and so Colonel Mengistu was left without aid, military aid. So he turned his face to Israel for two reasons. First, for military aid. The second is especially to get an assistance of Jewish lobby in United States Congress, you know, to approach the United States. But what is sad is, in the 1980s, Reagan made various approaches, you know, to Mengistu, even, you know, to solve the Eritrean issue and also other issues. But Mengistu refused. But just 2 years before he was deposed, he wanted to approach Israel to get this kind of assistance. So Israel really reluctantly agreed, but they didn't assist him militarily. They sent writers, military advisors, etc.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just kindly reminding you the time limit, but please, I hope you will conclude in 2-3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, now I will pass, quickly. In 1991, Ethiopian Jews were airlifted from Ethiopia, and around $35 million was paid in cash for their release. And after 1991, the relation is blossoming with Israel. But unlike the Haile Selassie era, the Mengistu era, now the relation is not mostly the relation is mostly economic and not related with arms and things like that. There is a very good relationship. For example, in fields of agriculture, health, and technology, Israel is assisting Ethiopians in many respects. For example, the smallholder horticultural project, it was a project which took almost 13 years. Now Ethiopia is planting around 1 million avocado trees and is exporting it to Europe. And this fruit is becoming even more profitable than coffee and sesame seeds. And also, Ethiopia has become number 2 exporter of flowers. Netafim which invented drip irrigation, is operating in Ethiopia. There are many Israel NGOs operating in Ethiopia: Fair Planet, Cultivate, etc. Regarding health, around 700 children were operated on by cardiac surgeons, and Israel also trained doctors which are now working in the Ethiopian Cardiac Center. Yeah. And also eye surgeons flew several times and operating on thousands of patients. And Israel is also developing a project of emergency and trauma medicine. So the relationship is blossoming. What is important, what I want to stress is, despite of the governmental change, the relations, the historic old relationship is still continuing and flourishing. And this brings us back to the Jerusalem. And I want to cite one anecdote, and then I will try to summarize. My younger brother, he he named two of his daughters. One of his daughters is named Jerusalem, and the youngest one is known as Zion. Zion is another name for Jerusalem. Why? Because after I came here as a kind of token recognition about Israel, and his eldest son is known as Israel. So I think this relation between Jerusalem and Ethiopia will continue. And one final notice to you, Lalibela is considered as a second Jerusalem. And on next Sunday, there will be history in Lalibela. You know why? Because there will be a total solar eclipse for, let's say, something like 36 seconds on Lalibela. Yeah. So thank you very much for having me as a second lecturer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ambassem. I'm just coming as a second, moderator, if I may say. My name is Lu'ul. I'm the diplomat at the Ethiopian Embassy in Tel Aviv. Thank you very much again, Dr. Ambassem, for providing us the broader historical, background, which of course would lead us to the remaining two interesting presentations, which are going to address the matter that we are discussing, which is Ethiopia in Jerusalem. Allow me to briefly introduce the next speaker, Dr. Benny First. Thank you very much, Dr. Benny First, for joining us. Dr. Benny First, he's a geographer, expert for the history of Africa. He's, of course, very much knowledgeable about the whole continent of Africa, of course, including Ethiopia. He is teaching at the Hebrew University at Jerusalem, and he will be speaking about Ethiopian Christian community in Jerusalem. Without further ado, let me invite Dr. Benny First to present his paper. Thank you very much again, please.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, please.
And can you see the PowerPoint, the presentation?
Yes, an interesting, PowerPoint.
Okay. So thanks again. Good afternoon to everybody from Jerusalem. First of all, I would like to say many thanks to Mr. Ambassador for the opportunity to take part in this very important symposium. Before I start, let me just tell you something personal, if I may. Many years ago, when I was a child, I had two dreams. My first dream was to live in Jerusalem. I need to say I was not born in Jerusalem. And the second one was to travel in Africa. So when I grew up after my army service, I started to fulfill these two dreams. I moved to Jerusalem, and while I'm walking in the streets of Jerusalem, first of all, as a tour guide, I discovered Africa. And the first country that I discovered was Ethiopia. After seeing those streets and narrow streets, especially those churches, the Ethiopian churches in Deir el-Sultan in the city center of Jerusalem. So this is how I reached Ethiopia in Africa. It was 30 years ago. And for many years, I'm a tour guide in these two places. And even today, every time when I take Israeli groups, when they see Jerusalem, to see the Ethiopian sites in Jerusalem, they are shocked to see how important is Ethiopia. And when I'm traveling to Ethiopia with Israelis, they are shocked to see how Jerusalem is important to Ethiopia itself. So let us speak about the connection. Now, my master teacher, Professor Hagai Ehrlich, He spoke about Jerusalem in general as a concept, as a historical concept, and how meaningful is this city in the Ethiopian culture and history. I want to add to this that there is an Ethiopian Christian community. People are living. It's a kind of a living museum, like Ethiopia is a museum of nations. Jerusalem is a kind of a living museum for a small community of 600 to 700 people, Ethiopian Christians who live here, and they are keeping the ark, so-called the ark or not so-called. And it's very important to understand them because they are a link in a long connection, goes back to the Bible. So let us start with a few words about, just a minute. First of all, as the other speakers spoke, there is a faith, there is the basic tradition of the Ethiopian people. They preserve a biblical ancient story that actually combines two large narratives. First of all, there's the Jewish narrative, that is, there are being a science of King Solomon and the famous story with the meeting with Makeda, Queen of Sheba. And the second narrative is the Ethiopian narrative, that is to keep the connection, that is the physical and political and geographical connection between Ethiopia and Zion. Now, these two faiths are coming not just as a concept, you can see them in Jerusalem as an urban entity, something which is real. You can see on the left side, this is the inner chapel of the Ethiopian Patriarch in the Christian quarter in the old city. That is the heart of the community over there. And there is a special street. Only 5 to 6 years ago, the municipality of Jerusalem named it officially as the Ethiopian Monastery Street. Now, this faith is, again, the people, those 600 to 700 people living in the community here in Jerusalem, they see themselves as preserving this faith in their mind and also the physical sites in the streets of Jerusalem. One of the interesting things here is since when this community is here. Now, there are some, not conflicts, but there are many doubts about when and exactly when the beginning of this community here. Is it from the biblical times or is it from the Christian times? But as far as I know, from my research as I did, the first evidence exists. There are some of the Ethiopian Christian community in the old city. The preliminary evidence comes from a Byzantine and early Islamic period. The first mention of the existence of this community appears in a letter sent to Rome by two of Jerome's students in the 4th century. Jerome was one of the fathers of the early Roman Church, and they invite their friends to come and visit Jerusalem. It's from the 4th century, and they write in the letter, Jerusalem, as you can see here in the slide, Jerusalem is filled with groups of monks from India, Persia, and Ethiopia. The second one, we have some from the Middle Ages, but I went 1,000 years after. There is a nice quote of a French pilgrim who wrote in 1532, "From there we went to the place where Abraham fulfilled his duty to sacrifice his son Isaac. There is a chapel there of dark-skinned people called Ethiopians. There is also an olive tree of outstanding beauty, as in the days of Abraham when he was about to sacrifice his son." That is what I brought here. I have only 600 seconds. So you can understand that historically there are many other quotes giving the evidence of the existence of a long history of this community here. And we are talking about the area of the old city. This is one of the prides of this community. to share the history for long, many years. Jerusalem as a whole is a kind of a mosaic of cultures, and the Ethiopians are a part of it. Going back to our time, to the modern eras, after speaking about the heritage, the faith, and the roots, at the end of the 19th century, the community, just as the other Jews, Muslims, and Christians, they start to leave the old city within the walls and started to build new houses, mansion houses, outside of the walls, what is today the city center, the modern Jerusalem. Now, Ethiopia, and Professor Hagai usually is emphasizing this very, very importantly. He says that there is a nice street in Jerusalem. Today it's called the street of the prophets. But originally, during the British Mandate time, the name of that street was the Street of the Consuls, because there were 7 consuls, 7 international consuls in that street. Only one of them is from a country which is not Europe or United States. This is Ethiopia. And it was built at the end of the 19th century, starting with the famous building you can see on the picture on the right side. This is the nice palace. It's the palace of Empress Taitu. She built that one. Later on, it became to be the radio broadcast studios of the British Mandate period, and later on of the State of Israel. Their daughter, the daughter of Empress Taitu, and Menelik II, Empress Zaudito, she built later on in the street of the consuls, the Ethiopian consulate, which is something which is not obvious. The only country, the only entity from Africa that has a big, large, huge, beautiful building in the heart of Jerusalem, along with the other consulates of Germany, United States, Italy, and here we have Ethiopia. And just to remind to us all, 1923, Ethiopia is becoming a member in the League of Nations, the only African state in that important organization. So we have this modern architectural heritage, which today gives us the second hotspot, if you like, or the second location of the Ethiopians. The holy sites are in the old city. And after me, architect Ron will talk about it. And the other one is in the city center of Jerusalem, as you can see here. And the ambassador, he mentioned before that there is a street with the name of Ethiopia, as you can see on the top of the slide. But the heart of this neighborhood of Ethiopians, by the way, we are speaking here in English, but people who live in Jerusalem, they all know that the name of this area is still today, it's called Shchunat HaChabashim. That means the neighborhood of the Abyssinians or the Ethiopians. By the way, until 1982, the original name of that street was the Street of Abyssinia. Then it replaced to Street of Ethiopia. So the heart of this whole area, the first building of Israeli School of Art, Bezalel, and the other buildings of Taitu and Zaudito are only on the side. The heart of this whole area is this important Debregenet monastery, the heart of this church, a beautiful place, which built as a kind of a model of a small temple like King Solomon, because we all know every Ethiopian church is a kind of a small temple of King Solomon. And here we see a beautiful architecture. Well, it's not from African wood, because we're in Jerusalem, but you can all see that it's the circle shape of a church. And in this, the Berganet, the mountain of paradise, this is the religious heart of the Ethiopian community in the city center of Jerusalem. And as I said before, we're not talking about museum. This is a living museum which serves the whole community 24/7 until today for many, many years. Speaking about people, maybe the important event that took place for that community was to receive Emperor Haile Selassie when he went to exile from Ethiopia in these tragic events that we all know in May 1936. Emperor Haile Selassie, Rastafari Makonnen, before he arrived, he went to Europe for 5 years for exile, not before spending exactly 2 weeks in Jerusalem. And he visited all the other sites that we've seen in the Deir al-Sultan and in the consulate. And for the Jewish community, especially the kids in Jerusalem, you could see later on in poets and in songs and in books, how that diplomatic visit of the exiled Abyssinian emperor in Jerusalem was so impressive. On the right side, we see Haile Selassie in front of one of the rooms of the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. Before I conclude, I just wanted to read for you a small part from a poet, which is called The Alley of Abyssinians, which was written by the Israeli Hebrew poet Yaakov Orland. He wrote it in 1986, but he remembered 50 years ago the visit of Haile Selassie as a small child, and he wrote a long makam about it. And he remembered it as a very important event, because he saw how the local Ethiopian Christian community was mourning and were very sad that one nation from the League of Nations, that is Italy, the fascist Italy of Mussolini, they wanted to destroy and to kill Ethiopia. Finally, we all know they did not succeed after 5 years. We know all the history of 1941 and later on. But let us read this small poet to see the connection between Ethiopia and Zion. And I will read it before we end. I see their king and tears in my eye, as if the same story we ever do share, and happy to know that in the time of despair, he came to my Zion in hope of redemption, to be hugged by us, the Jerusalem nation. And with this beautiful mosaic at the top of the Ethiopian consulate in Jerusalem, which maybe one day it will become again to be the official consulate of Ethiopia in Israel, I would like to conclude. The Ethiopian readers of you, they don't need to translate, but I do it because it's very important to understand. So it's important to see the victory of Ethiopia in Jerusalem. The Lion of Judah has won, or is it more originally in Amharic? I hope I'll read it right. Mo Anbesa Samengeda Yehuda. Amesagenalo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Benny. First, very impressive presentation. Thank you again for your insightful, and I would also add colorful presentation, which was like a virtual tour. That's precisely what we need at this time. Thank you very much again, really appreciate. In the interest of time, let me briefly introduce our next speaker, Mr. Ron Luis Gross, who is a professional architecture lecturer at Bezalel Academy of Art and Design here in Jerusalem. He has been the head of the housing unit of the academy, and his interest, among others, since 2015, focuses on migration and urban centers. He will be speaking about Deir Sultan, between East and West. Mr. Ron Luis Gross, many thanks again for joining us. Please, the floor is yours.
Sorry, I'll try again. It's a pleasure to listen to my colleagues, and I hope this is the beginning of many others. I would like to focus this talk on what we do in Bezalel, and it'll begin from our beginning, which I think Benny already touched on. So let us begin. Deir al-Sultan, between East and West. Wait a minute. I would like to thank, before starting today, I would like to thank the following institutions and individuals. The symposium organizers in the Ethiopian Embassy in Israel, His Excellency Ambassador Tel Nega, for this important topic. The community of Deir al-Sultan for the warm hospitality, for opening their private quarters and sharing the harsh conditions they endure. And our school of Betzalel and the support from Professor Elsewhere Bakel, Director of Architecture and Urban Design, my partner to this project, architect Moti Bachwilger, and finally to the fantastic group of students that have challenged us all the way till this day, where I am proud to share their work and commitment to the community as best I imagine architects' active role in this time and place. Well done. And to my colleagues abroad, Professor Ian Lowe from Cape Town University and Helawi Suenat from EIABC and Addis Ababa University, teaching partners to the Jerusalem Lalibela studio. Through the exploration, let's see if I get this. Through the exploration of a uniquely situated design studio, this paper intends to demonstrate a precondition of protection space, social innovation, and the power of process in inverting conventional teaching relations to afford a unique rereading of the city yet to come. The point would be to identify the role of architecture design as an enabler or assistance in a particular socio-spatial dialect, notably in context of community fragmentation of the Holy Sepulchre community today. I will foreground with an introduction to our school, the Betzalel Academy of Art and Design in Jerusalem. This, I hope, will continue the sequence, streaming our discussion about Jerusalem houses and institutions built by Ethiopia and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, given now by Dr. Benny Fürst, a context that will help explain our work at Betzalel today. In 1906, Boris Schatz founded Betzalel, First Academy of Art and Design in Jerusalem. He named it after Betzalel Ben-Uri, the first biblical artist who was commissioned to make the sanctuary and the Ark of the Covenant. This was intended to establish a direct, legitimating link between art and Judaism, and between the new project and the ancient tradition. The first home for the Academy was rented to Schatz by the Ethiopian Church in space at the Empress Teto's estate, and the official emblem, as you can see to the left, chosen for Betzalel by Schatz, was the Ark of the Covenant, designed by E.M. Lillian. I continue. This paper reflects on an ongoing project, The Right to the City, coined by Henri Lefebvre, 1967, in emerging contexts in Africa, Europe, and the Middle East, for communities living often in the outskirts of urban cores. This project is different. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church community has been in Jerusalem since the 6th century and is part of the largest Orthodox Church with 53 million members in Ethiopia today. As an historical component of the human settlement story in Jerusalem, we found the Deir al-Sultan, a community in a critical reality. When the home for this great community foresees uncertainty lying ahead, the urban settlement and the individual institution evolve to prepare to maintain their place of worship and priesthood as part of this historic legacy. And and as an equal member among the communities within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. As you can see, and this is a map prepared in 1898 by the architect Konrad Schick, who some say is involved in the design of the last or two buildings for the Ethiopian community in modern Jerusalem, the church, and maybe Benny later will help me with this, and the consulate. Recent history has transpired as to deny the continuity of Dila Sultan historic role as the home for this community. Yet, whilst a member of the communities of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, with fundamental rights in the city of Jerusalem and a significant role in contributing to the building of modern Jerusalem and its institutions, i.e. B'Tzalel, while having historic rights as members of the community of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It is our conviction that these basic fundamental rights are what allow us the freedom of engagement of life together, to welcome difference and maintain a heritage of spiritual relevance in the city, as centered to the identity of so many in this world today. In fact, despite all the warrings over its control, it enjoyed from its outset Jerusalem as the just and open city, and which represents a utopic dream for us today. To situate the history of settlement in Jerusalem would be to reflect on the history of its religious foundations, practices of settling in Jerusalem that all but consist of mediated journey in preparation to settle and to build Jerusalem, i.e. the Holy Covenant in the desert and Solomon's temple that reached Mount Moriah. What you can see is how rich this landscape is. I just wanted to point out, if you can see my cursor, that this is where the Holy Sepulchre and the hill of Golgotha is supposedly to develop. This is Mount Moriah, and you can see it's quite a landscape. I would like to make a quote here of Mirza Eliade. For a believer, the church shares in a different space from the street in which it stands. The door that opens to the interior of the church actually signifies a solution of continuity. The threshold that separates the two spaces also indicates the distance between two modes of being, the profane and the religious. The threshold is the limit, the boundary, the frontier that distinguishes and opposes two worlds, and at the same time, the paradoxical place where those worlds communicate. From The Sacred and Profane by Mirza Eliade. It is in this crossroad that Dir al-Sultan is today, between the once basilica to the market and the Caldo Maximus, resulting in the between two modes of being. Of this space and its potential to reenact its center for the community and the communities of the city between the sacred and the profane. In an effort, I don't know if you can see in detail, in an effort to understand better the forces building the future city, we found great value in simultaneous address, a parallel study between communities in Ethiopia and the communities in Jerusalem. While the tradition helps develop guides for our research, contemporary architectural practice, we have made a contribution employing flexible, adjusting measures, often found in private units we call incremental housing, though it seems to remain concealed from the public and often not present in the community and urban fora. I'll I'll continue. In our case, this became a significant strategy of engagement in questions related to community institutions and the public commons. We have found the history of the church to have a resilient mechanism to renew and adapt, even at times to restructure, to accommodate change, and at times of need. In this time of need, it is this realm that we chose to measure and speculate of a new imagination to address this growing state of urgency. I will continue.
Apologies to interrupt you again, Mr. Gross. I'm just reminding you we have a time limit, but I hope you will conclude in 2-3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Yes, I intend to. I'm sorry. 1 minute. So much information. Okay, in a series of church, this is very interesting for those of you who recognize these maps. The plans show the contemporary building and the change of geometry, orientation, and elevations. On the left, you can see that as the church developed, it built itself and rebuilt itself many times, changing its orientation. Though on the right, you can see the ideal church, the ideal orientation, the single line. The history shows flexibility, shows how rivers that run under the Church of the Holy Sepulchre allowed this building to develop. This is the beauty of architecture. And there's a lot to say about it, but not today. So just to move one more step further, one of the tools that we in school understand as being relevant in the development of the church is the cloister. The cloister, as you see on the right, is above the Saint Helena chapel. And under that cloister ran a valley. That's where the cisterns lay. The students, which I won't go into their projects in detail, learned from these qualities, found them as significantly important, and proposed a series of examples of how to work within these spaces. I won't go into these details now. I would like to end with a conclusion. Today, in the rapidly urbanizing and densifying character of the city and its future, it is the role and potential of design thinking to offer spatial solutions to urban problems whereby difference can coexist and civility be reinforced, as to continue the idea of the city, the greatest invention of human civilization. Ethiopians' hospitality of Bezalel, spatial sharing, unique role of design as a spatial language, architectural armature, infrastructure as mediators of difference, public roots, public mediation, cloister, public exchange market in resolving conflict, and academic as societal servant, I too providing a space of intellectual confrontation of ideas, joint and foreign studios like the Jerusalem Lalibela studio. The community of Bezalel today is comprised of students from many parts of the world that contribute to the body of creative research and conceptual principles we presented today we hope to present again in full scope. Our students are from Germany, Sweden, Denmark, Austria, France, Palestine, and Israel. Jerusalem is the home of the Ethiopian Orthodox community for the right to the city. The practice of rights and citizenship come in different forms. 1,500 years in Jerusalem is unprecedented. Thank you.
Mr. Gross, thank you very much for your
Sorry.
presentation.
Wrong.
Really appreciate. We really enjoyed your presentation. I know the time did not allow you to go through some of the excellent slides, but I can assure you this is just the beginning of our series of seminars on this important theme, Ethiopia in Jerusalem. Thank you very much again for all the 4 speakers, of course, including the very comprehensive statement that we heard from His Excellency Ambassador Ratalamu, who will be joining us very soon for the concluding remarks. Before that, obviously, I would imagine most of you might have a comment or a suggestion. Given the limitation in terms of time, allow me to invite 1 or 2 participants to give their comment or question. And then, of course, in the interest of time, go to the ambassador for his concluding remarks. 1 or 2 participants, please. Thank you very much. I understand maybe you are keeping your questions for our next round of discussion on the same topic. I just got a question from one of our participants for Professor Haggai Edridge. I'm just paraphrasing the question. Thanking you for your presentation. The question is about how do we further consolidate the current, the existing Israeli relationship in different, fields. Thank you.
It was addressed to me. Well, as the Americans say, if it's okay, don't fix it. I think relations now between Ethiopia and Israel are the best ever. In the past, there was an overly romantic approach by the Ethiopians, then later an overly romantic approach by the Israelis. Today, things are blessed with mutual sobriety. Expectations are realistic. And I think the relations are of mutual benefit and the best possible. A sense of alliance, a sense of mutual values and interests. So let it run its course. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Haggai. And now, as I have repeatedly mentioning, in the interest of time, I just want to say thank you very much for all the speakers for your excellent presentations. And of course, I would like to express my profound appreciation to all of you, the participants, for joining us. But it's not me who is going to say thank you very much. I would like to invite His Excellency Ambassador Ratalamu to give his vote of thanks as well as his concluding remarks. From my side, thank you very much for joining us. Ambassador, please.
Thank you, Atolul Saget. I have to thank all of you for this opportunity to come today to with you on this the Embassy of the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia opportunities like this to promote the relationship and make the friendship of the two countries. In this slide, the with scholars, the 4 scholars from Tel Aviv University, Hebrew University, and Dr. Benny First, we have had this interesting discussion. And under this topic, we'll continue the work as a part of public effort. The symposium is to explore ways to bond of friendship and cooperation in September. But another round of Webinar Symposium will be held after 2 weeks on July 7 from Addis. The scholars, notable scholars from Addis Ababa University will make their presentations, and we all thank the scholars who made presentations today, and we'll expect to hear the next round of presentations in 2 weeks' time. The outcomes of this preliminary webinar symposium and main symposium will help us to see the way forward, to be able to strengthen the ties and also explore the ways and how we can strengthen the relationship. I thank you. I thank you for all those who take part in the live discussions. And we'll continue the discussions after 2 weeks with the next webinar from Addis. Thank you very much. Thank you for all of you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to see you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shalom.
Shalom, shalom, מה שלומך? I hope to see you all again, and we will have chance to talk about Ethiopia. Thank you.